Ayana Cole leaned toward the chipped water fountain in the bustling school hallway. Her throat parched from a grueling PE class where uphill sprints had left her calves burning. Just as the cool stream hit her lips, a heavy hand slammed down, choking the flow. Bryce Whitaker loomed above her, his grin sharp and taunting, like a predator savoring a trap. "This one's ours," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Your kind had your own. Remember?" His words weren't a one-off jab, they were a ritual, a constant hum of cruelty woven into the fabric of her days. Whispers trailed her in the corridors. Desks jolted as she passed, and teachers, with their selective deafness, let it all slide. They expected her to swallow the insults, to shrink and stay silent, but they didn't know Ayana Cole. Raised by two black Navy SEALs, she was forged in discipline, trained to read the battlefield, and primed to strike when the moment was right. The boys who strutted like they owned these halls were about to learn she wasn't the girl you backed into a corner. And she wasn't letting this slide, not today, not ever. The air grew thick as a venomous slur cut through the hallway's chatter, sharp as a blade. "Go back to the jungle." Ayana froze mid-step near the main stairwell, the words landing like a physical blow. Laughter erupted, raw and unrestrained, from three boys in varsity jackets lounging against the lockers with the arrogance of kings. Bryce Whitaker stood at the center, broad-shouldered and smug, one sneaker propped against the metal behind him, arms crossed like he was auditioning for a billboard. Flanking him, Cody and Trent snickered, trading fist bumps and scanning the crowd for reactions. A few students glanced over, hesitated, then turned away. Nervous giggles rippled from a group of girls by the water fountain, their whispers darting like minnows. No one spoke up. No one ever did. Ayana didn't flinch. Her face remained a mask of calm, though her fingers tightened around her backpack strap. She kept walking, her pace steady, but Bryce wasn't done. Leaning forward as she passed, he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. "What? Didn't catch that. Must be all that jungle clogging your ears." Cody's laugh boomed, and Trent, ever the performer, thumped the locker beside him, mimicking a cartoonish tribal beat. Ayana stopped. Slowly she turned, her gaze locking onto Bryce's with a precision that made his smirk flicker. Her voice, when it came, was cool as steel. "You should see a doctor about that throat. All that poison's gotta be clogging something." The jab landed. Bryce's grin wavered, then hardened. Feisty. "Huh, bet you talk like that at home. All that hood rat vibe just waiting to slip out." She didn't bite. His words weren't meant for dialogue, they were power plays, designed to bait a reaction he could spin. So she held his stare for one deliberate second, then turned and walked away, her heart pounding, every muscle taut with the effort to keep from shattering something. Behind her, their jeers faded into a low, menacing chuckle, like wolves circling behind a flimsy fence, dangerous only when no one was looking, and no one ever looked. In the classroom, silence greeted her like a held breath. 20 pairs of eyes flicked her way, then darted elsewhere. Mr. Dale, hunched over his laptop, barely glanced up. "Late, Ayana," he muttered, as if her presence was an inconvenience. She offered no excuse, no defense, just slid into her seat and opened her notebook with the same meticulous care she used to fold her clothes or make her bed before dawn. Those weren't just chores, they were her parents' lessons, rituals of resilience, armor for a world that rarely played fair. That evening, the calm of her home felt like a different planet. Tucked in a quiet neighborhood just beyond the city, the house was orderly, its minimalist living room adorned with framed photos of sunrises over oceans and rugged mountains, no trace of the military honors her parents had earned. That was deliberate. Ayana sat at the dining table, her chin propped on her hand, flipping through her Yuba's history textbook without really seeing the words. The faint aroma of her mother's cooking wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the muted drone of a news segment about a school board meeting. She didn't notice her father enter until the chair across from her creaked. Commander Marcus Cole didn't speak right away. His presence alone filled the room, steady and unyielding, like a lighthouse in a storm. He studied her, his broad hands folded, his face a mask of quiet strength. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice low but piercing. She looked up, hesitated, then shook her head. "Same as always." The words were her default, a safe deflection, but today they carried a faint edge she couldn't hide. His eyes narrowed, catching it. "Someone put hands on you?" She shook her head again. "No, but they tried to hurt you." It wasn't a question. From the kitchen, her mother's voice called. "Dinner's ready, not yet," Marcus replied, his gaze never leaving Ayanna. She closed her book, the soft thud louder than it should have been. "I can handle it," she said, her voice steady but humming with something taut, like a bowstring drawn tight. "You shouldn't have to," he said, his tone even but firm. Not alone, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. "I'm not alone," she said at last. "I'm just waiting." He didn't push. He leaned back, nodded once and gave her space. But his eyes watchful, trained, unflinching told her he was already strategizing. The next day, the school's fourth period bell rang, unleashing a flood of students into the halls like a river breaking free. Ayanna moved through the chaos with practiced grace, shoulders squared, head high, steps measured, every lingering stare, every half-muttered slur, every elbow that grazed her just a bit too hard. She absorbed it all, her expression unyielding. She turned down the corridor past the gym, her breath still sharp from PE, sweat beating at her collarbone, her legs aching from relentless drills. The water fountain stood ahead, its chrome dulled, the basin chipped, rust staining the floor. She bent to drink, pressing the button, but the stream sputtered and died. A hand blocked the spout. Bryce Whitaker stood over her, fingers splayed over the fountain like a gatekeeper. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. Behind him, Cody leaned against the wall, chewing gum with a lazy smirk, while Trent spun a football in his hands, poised for the next act in their cruel play. "Thirsty?" "Huh?" Bryce asked, his tone mockingly polite. Ayanna straightened, her hand dropping from the button. "It's a fountain," she said, her voice level. "Not a checkpoint." Bryce tilted his head, his grin widening. "Didn't your people have your own? Not that long ago, right? Two fountains, one for us, one for, you know." He leaned closer, eyes glinting, kept things nice and organized. Cody stepped forward, pointing to the rusted sign above the fountain. "Bet we could spruce it up." Big letters. "Colored only. Real vintage vibes." Trent laughed, tossing the football lightly. "Yearbook material? Call it a history lesson." Bryce drummed his fingers on the spout, water dribbling onto the floor. Ayanna's voice sliced through, sharp and unyielding. "You mean the history your grandpa probably hid in a box before the feds knocked?" The air stilled. Bryce's smirk faltered, his recovery sluggish. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped, his tone fraying. She raised an eyebrow. "Just sounds like you're pining for a fight your side already lost. You missed the part where you ended up on the wrong side of history." Cody's gums snapped loudly. "Watch how you talk," he growled, stepping closer. Ayanna turned to face them fully, unflinching. "Or what? You'll sling more dead slurs, shove me into a locker, post it online with a winking emoji." Trent shifted, uneasy. Bryce puffed his chest, trying to reclaim control. "We'll make it crystal clear you don't belong here." Ayanna's eyes didn't waver. "And I'll make sure the whole world sees exactly what that looks like." The hallway buzzed with the dull hum of fluorescent lights, casting stark shadows on the linoleum floor. Bryce opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat, trapped by the weight of the moment. A sharp voice sliced through the air from down the corridor, grating and intrusive. "Hey, what's going on here?" All four heads, Bryce, Cody, Trent, and Ayanna, snapped toward the sound. Mr. Heller, the assistant football coach who doubled as the economics teacher, stormed toward them, his clipboard clutched like a shield, eyes narrowed under the brim of his worn cap. Ayanna took a subtle step back, her face tightening. She'd seen this script play out before. Bryce, ever the performer, turned to the coach first, raising his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. Nothing. Coach, just messing around. She got a little worked up, that's all. Heller's gaze flicked between them. Bryce's smug grin, Cody and Trent's barely concealed smirks, and Ayana's steady, unyielding stare. You yelling, Heller asked, directing the question at Ayana. I was responding, she said, her voice deliberate, each word measured. To what? Ask them. Heller let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind that dodged accountability like a seasoned pro. Doesn't matter what was said. This isn't the time or place for arguments. It wasn't an argument, Bryce cut in, his tone smooth as polished glass. Just a misunderstanding. Heller nodded, already turning away. All of you, move it, and keep it down next time. These halls carry sound. The boys scattered without a fight, their shoulders shaking with stifled laughter, their eyes glinting with the kind of smugness that only came from dodging consequences. As Bryce passed Ayana, he leaned in just enough for his words to land like a jab. That mouth of yours is gonna get you in trouble. Ayana didn't flinch. Her fists stayed loose at her sides, her posture unshaken, but her voice, low and deliberate, trailed after him like a spark chasing dry tinder. Good. Maybe trouble's overdue. She turned and headed back to class, her throat tight, her stomach knotted. The moment lingered in her mind long after it ended, not just the words, but the silence that followed. The way Heller hadn't bothered to ask what sparked the exchange. Only who had dared to raise their voice. Later that evening, Ayana sat on the front porch of her home, the late afternoon sun painting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn. Her mother, Raquel Cole, handed her a bottle of water, its surface slick with condensation. No words passed between them at first, just the quiet comfort of presence. Raquel settled beside her daughter with the effortless grace of someone who had spent years learning to shrink in hostile spaces and even more years refusing to stay small. She didn't fidget or pepper the silence with questions. She simply waited, knowing Ayana would speak when the weight of her thoughts became too heavy to carry alone. They blocked the water fountain today, Ayana said at last, her voice flat, not from apathy but from the exhaustion of feeling too much. Raquel's head turned slowly, her expression unreadable in the fading light. Did they touch you? No, Ayana replied. Thus, they made jokes about segregation, said it should come back. Like it was funny, not real. Raquel's jaw tightened, a single controlled movement before she nodded, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of a truth she knew too well. Ayana leaned back, exhaling sharply through her nose. Then the coach came, didn't ask what happened, just who was loud, sent us all away like it was nothing, like it always is. Raquel studied her daughter's profile, her eyes narrowing faintly. You didn't snap. No. You wanted to? Yes. A pause stretched between them, heavy with understanding. You wouldn't have been wrong to, Raquel said. You know that. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken history, woven through generations of resilience and resistance. After a moment, Raquel shifted, her voice softer but no less firm. You know I grew up in East Texas, right? Ayana nodded faintly. Her mother rarely spoke of her childhood, and when she did, the details were sparse, offered like fragments of a half-forgotten map. We lived near a town called Jasper. Raquel continued, her gaze drifting somewhere beyond the backyard, lost in memory. You'd think the worst of it would have been over by the time I was your age, but hate doesn't care about the calendar. I remember walking to school with rocks pelting my back. Got sent to the principal's office for disrupting class when I corrected a teacher about Frederick Douglass. They said I had an attitude, that I was intimidating. I was 13. Ayana turned slightly, watching her mother speak not with raw emotion, but with a clarity born of revisiting old wounds so often they no longer bled, only scarred. They laughed when I made honor roll. Raquel went on, mocked me for using big words, Said I talked white. Said I thought I was better than them. I stayed quiet at first, like you do. Thought if I was perfect, they'd stop trying to tear me down. Her eyes sharpened, locking onto Ayana's. They didn't. Ayana listened, absorbing every word, feeling something inside her settle, like scattered pieces clicking into place. They got scared when I stopped pretending, Raquel said. Scared when I looked them in the eye and stopped apologizing for being smarter, for being stronger. When I enlisted, they said I'd never make it past basic training. I graduated top 3 in my class, deployed 6 times, cleared rooms most men wouldn't dare step into. She gestured faintly toward the house behind them, the quiet neighborhood with its manicured lawns and unspoken tensions. Now they nod politely at me in HOA meetings, but won't meet my eyes in the grocery store. Ayana looked down, her voice tight. And now I'm dealing with the same garbage you did. Different faces, same story. Raquel reached over, resting a hand lightly on her daughter's knee. Maybe, but you've got something I didn't. A name that already carries weight. A foundation that doesn't crack. Parents who fought on soil, Cambodian soil, most people can't even find on a map. We didn't train you just to defend yourself. We trained you to read pressure, to know when to hold, when to strike, and when to wait. They don't see it yet, but you're not a target. They're the ones stumbling blind through a minefield. A flicker of understanding passed over Ayana's face, not relief or pride, but a quiet resolve. Like the weight she'd been carrying had shifted into something she could bear with her head held high. They keep trying to remind me I don't belong, she said after a moment. Her mother's smile was sharp, the kind forged in battles fought and won. Then show them why they're afraid. Ayana nodded, slow and deliberate, and stood, brushing the dust from her sweatpants. Behind her, the porch light flickered on, as if affirming what she already knew: this fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The late bell had rung, and the back lot behind the gym was nearly deserted, save for the distant growl of a lawnmower chewing through patchy grass and the low hum of the school's rooftop AC units vibrating in the still air. Ayana stepped out alone, her path veering toward the quiet side gate where she liked to wait for her ride. It was the one corner of the school that felt untouched, free from the prying eyes of cameras or the whispers of cliques lurking in shadows. She adjusted the strap of her backpack when a voice cut through the silence, slow and edged with malice. You're a real piece of work, you know that. She didn't turn right away. She didn't need to. Only Bryce Whitaker spoke with that particular blend of smugness and venom, like he was grinning with a blade between his teeth. When she finally faced him, he was leaning against the brick wall by the dumpster enclosure, arms crossed, one boot heel propped lazily against the wall, as if he had all the time in the world. Waiting for your chauffeur, he asked, tilting his chin. Or do you Uber out of here like a peasant? Ayana didn't answer immediately. She studied him, the carefully tousled hair, the too clean varsity jacket, the forced ease in his posture. He was trying too hard to look relaxed, which meant he wasn't. You came out here just to stand by a dumpster and embarrass yourself, she said, her voice light, almost playful. His smirk faltered for a split second. Just thought we should have a talk. You and me. Clear the air. She stepped closer, not enough to provoke, but enough to show she wasn't intimidated by his proximity. You want to clear the air, then stop choking it with your insecurity. Excuse me? You've got something to say, she continued, her tone steady, unshaken. But instead of saying it, you hide behind jokes, behind your little fan club, behind teachers who pretend not to hear. You act like you own this place, but you're just another insecure kid with a spotlight addiction and a superiority complex. The smirk vanished, replaced by a cold, brittle stillness. You think you're tough, don't you? He said, stepping forward. You walk around like you're better than everyone, like we're beneath you. I walk like I know who I am, she said. You walk like you're praying no one notices how scared you are. Scared? He scoffed. Of you. No, she said, her voice soft but piercing. Of being ordinary. of not mattering once that jersey comes off, of the fact that your talent peaked in high school and your dad's still making calls to keep your path clear. His jaw clenched, the hit landing harder than he'd expected. You think you know me? I don't need to. You broadcast yourself loud enough for everyone to see. You're a cliché with cleats. Every weak man who's ever needed to feel big by making someone else feel small. For a moment, he stood frozen, his bravado cracking under the weight of her words. Then he turned, stalking off toward the parking lot, his footsteps echoing in the empty lot. Ayanna watched him go, her heart steady, her resolve unshaken. This wasn't over, but she was ready for whatever came next. Under a sky bruised with gray clouds, Ayanna moved through the school courtyard, her steps deliberate, her posture a blend of ease and vigilance. The wind tugged at stray leaves, sending them skittering across the pavement, while the flagpole outside the main entrance clattered in the restless gusts. The school buzzed with an undercurrent of tension that morning, not the usual chatter of weekend recaps or cafeteria gossip, but something heavier, like the air before a storm breaks. Eyes trailed her as she passed, conversations faltering in her wake. Whispers of her confrontation with Bryce had spread like wildfire over the weekend, fueled by half-truths and exaggerated retellings in group chats and locker room huddles. She hadn't fanned the flames herself, no posts, no boasts, no need. The silence spoke louder than any megaphone. Days earlier, in the heat of a crowded hallway, Bryce had tried to tear her down, his words sharp but clumsy, like a blade wielded by someone who didn't know its weight. I bet you practice those little speeches in the mirror, don't you? He'd sneered, his chest rising with a breath that betrayed his faltering confidence. His taunt was meant to sting, but it landed hollow, more echo than impact. Ayanna tilted her head, unfazed. No, she said, her voice steady, slicing through his bravado. I just listen. You're loud enough for me to memorize you without even trying. Her words were a mirror, reflecting his bluster back at him. Keep talking. Cole, you're going to trap yourself in a corner you can't swagger out of. Bryce's eyes narrowed, his body inching forward, close enough for the air between them to crackle with tension. You mean like fact, receipts, audio files, he shot back, his voice laced with a challenge. You recording me right now, Ayanna didn't flinch. I don't need to, she said coolly. You've said plenty in public. If you think I'm the only one listening, you're not just reckless, you're delusional. He stepped closer still, too close, the space between them taut as a pulled wire. His voice dropped, venom curling in his words. You think your parents can shield you? Some military dad's gonna scare me. Ayanna held her ground, her gaze unwavering. My parents don't need to scare you, she said. The truth's already got you rattled. For the first time. Bryce faltered, his cheeks flushing with the heat of embarrassment, his usual swagger replaced by a flicker of rage, the kind that sparks when someone like him is outmaneuvered without a single blow. You've been waiting for me to slip up, haven't you? He pressed, his voice tight. One mistake, and you'll play the victim. Right? Ayanna exhaled slowly, deliberate. The difference between us, Bryce, is I don't need to pretend. I don't need to fake strength or lean on someone else's power. I don't need to lie. You need a lie just to stand here. His lips parted, but whatever retort he'd mustered dissolved into the air. A car horn blared in the distance, her ride pulling onto the side road. Without a glance, Ayanna turned, her steps unhurried, her voice drifting back like a parting shot. Next time you want to feel powerful, try doing something that doesn't make you look pathetic. She didn't wait for his response. She didn't need to. By Monday, the story had taken on a life of its own, a virus spreading through the school's veins. Ayanna felt the weight of it in the lingering stares, the hushed pauses as she walked the halls. After the final bell, she lingered outside, leaning against the brick wall near the gym, her backpack slung at her side. The parking lot was nearly deserted, save for a few late buses idling at the curb and a scattering of kids heading to the fields. She'd started avoiding the school's front entrance, fewer eyes, fewer chances for someone to test her in the open. Then came the footsteps, quick, sharp, purposeful. She knew it was Bryce before he spoke. "You think that was funny?" His voice was raw, stripped of the lazy confidence he usually wore like a second skin. Ayanna turned slowly, meeting his gaze. He stood 10 feet away, jaw clenched, eyes burning with something desperate, unfiltered. She didn't answer, just watched him, waiting. "You think you can talk to me like that? Humiliate me?" His voice rose, cracking at the edges. "You think this is a game?" "No," Ayanna said, her tone calm but piercing. "I think you lost the one you started." He stepped closer, his posture radiating challenge. "You hide behind your last name." He spat. "You think you're untouchable because your parents wear uniforms?" She shook her head, unruffled. "I'm not hiding. I stand in the open. You're the one creeping up behind girls in parking lots." The words hit like a dart, and his face flushed deeper, his breathing quickening. "Say something like that again," he growled, taking another step. "What?" Ayanna asked, her voice still steady, still cutting. "You'll hit me." The question hung between them, heavy as a hell breath. He didn't answer. Then he moved fast, sloppy, driven by rage rather than control. He grabbed the strap of her bag, yanking hard to throw her off balance. But Ayanna was ready. Her body reacted before her mind needed to, stepping into his pull, shifting her weight, and twisting sharply to wrench the strap free. His shoulder turned, unguarded, and she planted her foot, pushing him back with a firm palm to his chest. He stumbled, arms flailing, but didn't fall, not yet. "You want to make this physical?" she asked, her breath even, her heart steady. "Is that how far you've fallen?" He charged again, this time swinging a wild, clumsy arc, open-handed but unmistakable. Ayanna ducked low, sidestepping just enough for his blow to slice through empty air. As he overextended, she rose, gripping his forearm mid-motion and twisting, not enough to break, but enough to make him feel the edge of her capability. Pivoting smoothly, she braced one leg behind his and dropped him to the ground in a single, practiced motion. The crack of his body hitting the concrete echoed across the lot. A shrill scream pierced the silence. "Oh my God," she just slammed him. Two girls from the back row of her history class stood across the lot, phones already recording. Bryce groaned, dazed but not truly hurt, dragging himself upright with a look torn between fury and disbelief. "You saw that?" one of the girls shouted. She attacked him. Ayanna stepped back, her breathing deep but controlled, hands raised slightly, not in surrender, but in restraint. She didn't move toward him. She didn't speak. A teacher burst through the door, a security officer close behind, their footsteps pounding the pavement. "Back up, everyone," the teacher barked. Voices collided, students yelling, Bryce's voice rising in righteous indignation. "She threw me. She threw me." The officer approached Ayanna, his hand hovering near his belt, not on his weapon, but close enough to make her tense. "Hands where I can see them," he said sharply. She complied, not out of guilt, but survival. "She attacked me," Bryce repeated. "I didn't touch her." "Is that true?" the teacher asked, eyes darting between them. Ayanna didn't answer. She didn't need to. 3 phones were recording, but not one had caught the beginning. The main office was a study in curated calm, from the polished nameplates on the reception desk to the soft piano melody looping overhead, as if music could smooth over the chaos of the parking lot. Ayanna sat in an upholstered chair outside the principal's office, her backpack at her feet, her hands folded loosely in her lap. Her heart had settled, her breathing steady, but something sharper lingered in her eyes, too quiet for rage, too heavy for fear. The receptionist cast polite glances her way every few minutes but said nothing. Students didn't end up here unless they'd crossed a line or needed reminding they weren't untouchable. The office door opened. "Come in," Principal Lynn said, her tone a careful blend of calm and condescension. Ayanna rose, her eyes scanning the room out of habit: diplomas, plaques, a neatly folded school spirit banner in the corner, all arranged with the precision of someone who valued appearances over substance. Lynn waited until the door clicked shut before sitting behind her desk with a sigh that felt rehearsed. "Ayana," she began, folding her hands neatly on the blotter. "This is not how I wanted to end my day." Ayana said nothing, her gaze fixed on Lynn's face, ignoring the framed family photo and the untouched stack of policy manuals. She waited. "We've reviewed several student videos of the incident," Lynn continued, her voice adopting the measured cadence of an adult trying to sound impartial. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication, but Ayana's expression didn't shift. She knew the truth didn't always need a voice, not when the evidence was still unfolding. The video clip making the rounds online captured only a fleeting moment, Ayana pinning another student to the ground with a swift, controlled motion. That was the image everyone saw, the one that spread like wildfire across social media, racking up views and comments. But the footage conveniently left out what came before, how Bryce had grabbed her. His hands rough and unprovoked, his words laced with venom. No one bothered to record that part, and Ayana's voice, steady and unshaken, carried the weight of that omission as she sat across from Principal Lynn in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office. Lynn's smile was tight, tinged with a practiced regret that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I hear you, Ayana. I really do," she said, her tone measured, as if she'd rehearsed this conversation. "But without evidence of what happened before, we have to act on what's in front of us. And that video, it tells a very clear story." Ayana's face remained a mask of calm, her dark eyes unyielding. "So the lie becomes the truth because it's easier to file away." Her words were sharp, but delivered with a quiet precision that made them land harder. Lynn shifted in her chair, her fingers brushing the edge of a manila folder. "It's not about lies or truth," she said quickly, as if deflecting the accusation. "It's about optics, about keeping the school safe, maintaining order, and avoiding further disruption." There it was, optics. That slippery, insidious word that seemed to justify everything. "You're suspending me," Ayana said, not as a question, but as a statement, her voice flat with certainty. Lynn's tone softened, as if she were offering a consolation prize. 5 days, out of school, you'll be able to make up your assignments and return to classes next week. We're calling it a mutual engagement so it won't stain your permanent record." Ayana blinked once, her expression still unreadable. "I defended myself," she said, her voice low but firm. "I used control. I didn't escalate. I didn't hit him. I stopped him." "I believe you," Lynn replied, the words tumbling out too fast, too rehearsed. "But our hands are tied when public perception starts to take over the narrative." "Public perception," Ayana echoed, her voice now devoid of inflection. "Not facts." Lynn leaned forward slightly, her voice softening further, as if she could bridge the gap with kindness. "This is the best path forward. Ayana, sign here and you can return to class on Monday." She slid the manila folder across the desk, a pen resting neatly on top. Ayana didn't reach for the pen right away. Her gaze lingered on it, a small, ordinary object that somehow felt like a trap, a way to make her complicit in her own silencing. Slowly, deliberately, she picked it up, her fingers curling around the plastic with a calm she didn't fully feel. "Do I get a copy?" she asked, her voice cutting through the quiet. Lynn blinked, caught off guard. "A copy?" "Of the report I'm signing," Ayana said, her tone unwavering. "I want it for my records." Lynn hesitated, her composure faltering for a fraction of a second. "That's not typically necessary for students." "It is for me," Ayana said, her eyes locking onto Lynn's. The principal held her gaze for a moment longer than she seemed comfortable with before turning to a drawer, retrieving a photocopy with a practiced smile. "Of course," she said, sliding it across the desk. Ayana signed the form, took the copy, and folded it neatly into her backpack. She stood, her movements deliberate. "I'll have your assignments emailed to you," Lynn added, as if to reassure her. "We'll make sure this doesn't impact your GPA." Ayana looked down at her, her expression unyielding. "That's not what I'm worried about." Without another word, She turned and walked out. The school felt quieter than usual as she made her way down the side hallway toward the exit. The shadows stretched long across the tiled floor, the fading light of dusk painting the walls in muted grays. She passed the rows of lockers without glancing at them, past the library and the classroom where, as a freshman, she'd overheard someone mutter scholarship mascot under their breath, their words meant to sting. Outside, the wind greeted her like an old friend, sharp and bracing. She stepped into it, letting it pull at her jacket as she headed home. At home, the lights were already on, casting a warm glow that spilled onto the porch. Her father's truck sat in the driveway, its tires aligned with military precision, every detail measured and deliberate. From the street, the house looked like a haven, peaceful, orderly, untouched by chaos. But as Ayanna stood at the end of the walkway, the folded suspension notice in her backpack felt like a stone, heavy with unspoken truths. Inside, the scent of peppered chicken and jasmine rice filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of the kitchen. Her mother, Raquel, stood at the stove, stirring a pot, her brow lifting as Ayanna stepped through the door. "You're late," she said, her tone more curious than scolding. "Got held up," Ayanna replied, setting her backpack by the table. "I need to talk to both of you." Her father, Marcus, looked up from the kitchen island, where he was slicing a baked sweet potato. His posture shifted instantly, shoulders squaring, eyes narrowing as if he could sense the storm brewing. Raquel turned off the burner, her movements deliberate. "What happened?" Ayanna pulled out a chair and sat, her hands folded on the table like she was delivering a briefing. "There was a fight," she began, her voice steady, controlled. She didn't embellish or dramatize. She laid it out piece by piece, Bryce's ambush in the parking lot, the shove, the swing, the way she'd neutralized him without throwing a punch. She described the girls with their phones, recording only the moment that fit their narrative, and the security guards arriving too late to see the truth. Then she recounted the meeting with Principal Lynn, the carefully chosen words, the talk of optics, the 5-day suspension. Raquel leaned against the counter, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Marcus listened without blinking, his stillness a sign of the discipline he'd honed over years in the military. When Ayanna finished, the silence in the kitchen was thick, heavy with unspoken questions. Marcus spoke first, his voice low and deliberate. "And what exactly did the principal say when you told her what Bryce did first?" Ayanna hesitated for a heartbeat. She didn't care. Said the videos told the story. Said it's about perception, optics. Raquel pushed off the counter, setting her spoon down with a sharp clink. "I'm calling the superintendent," she said, moving toward the dining room where her phone sat charging. "Tonight." "No," Ayanna said, her voice firmer than she'd expected. "Don't." Raquel stopped, mid-stride, turning to face her daughter. Marcus's brow lifted slightly, his eyes studying her. "I'm handling this," Ayanna said. "On my terms." Raquel's expression hardened. "Handling what you just got suspended for defending yourself, and your school's protecting a violent racist because his family probably paid for half the gym. You think staying quiet will fix that?" "I'm not staying quiet," Ayanna said, her voice steady. "I'm being smart." Marcus tilted his head, his gaze piercing. "You're worried this turns into a media circus," he said, "that people only hear the part they want to hear." "I know how they twist it," Ayanna said, looking between her parents. "If you step in now, they'll say I hid behind you, that I ran to my big, bad military parents because I couldn't handle it myself." "You shouldn't have to stand alone," Raquel said, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not," Ayanna replied. "You've been training me for this my whole life. You taught me how to hold a line. Now I'm holding it." Raquel opened her mouth to argue, but Marcus raised a hand, his eyes still on his daughter. He studied her, not as a child, but as a young woman standing firm in the eye of a storm, choosing strategy over chaos. "What's your plan?" he asked, his tone not condescending, but genuinely curious. "I've been documenting everything," Ayanna said. "Audio, dates, names. I know what I can prove. I'm going to collect more, and when the truth comes out, It's going to hit hard. I'm not giving them any excuse to say I lost control. Raquel's lips pressed into a thin line. You shouldn't have to play chess with people who've already kicked over the board. But I'm good at chess, Ayana said quietly, her words carrying a weight that silenced the room. Marcus leaned back, his arms folding across his chest. You understand that if we let you do this, there's no halfway. You'll have to be sharper than them, every step of the way, colder, more patient than they deserve. I know, Ayana said. Raquel searched her daughter's face for any trace of fear, but all she found was a calm, burning resolve. If you change your mind, she said after a long pause, we move immediately. Ayana nodded. If I need you, I'll say the word. Marcus stood, placing a hand on her shoulder with a firm, grounding squeeze. I've seen men crumble under less pressure than this, he said, but I've never seen you flinch. Ayana's eyes didn't soften, but something in them glowed warmer. Then let me show you what I do when I don't flinch. Monday morning broke under a heavy, slate-gray sky, the kind that made the air feel thick and restless. At Eisenhower High, the flag snapped against its pole in the gusting wind, and students shuffled through the front doors, their voices a low hum of routine. But today was different. Today, Ayana Cole returned. She walked through the entrance with purpose, her steps measured, her posture impeccable. Dressed in plain black jeans and a black hoodie, she wore no logos, no distractions. Her earbuds were in, but no music played. She wanted clarity, not escape. The hallway grew quieter as she passed, not with the hush of respect, but with the subtle tension of eyes watching, heads tilting, whispers dipping behind locker doors. Bryce's name floated in fragments of conversation, a constant undercurrent. Ayana didn't flinch. She moved through the crowd like a blade through water, her focus unshaken, her plan already in motion. The truth was coming, and when it did, it wouldn't just speak, it would roar. She moved through the school with a quiet defiance, undeterred by the whispers that trailed her like shadows. Some were triumphant, others mocking, but none were silent. Yet she never faltered, never broke her steady stride. At her locker, she turned the dial with practiced ease, swapping out books as if the world around her wasn't buzzing with judgment. Inside, though, her senses were sharp, cataloging every detail: the scuff of sneakers behind her, the faint rustle of clothing, the sidelong glances that lingered too long, and above all, the words. She's back already. Someone muttered. Guess slamming someone doesn't get you kicked out if you play the right cards. Another voice chimed in, dripping with sarcasm. Probably cried to her parents. You know how they spin it. Ayana let the words slide past her, but each one was meticulously stored in the vault of her memory. Every snide remark, every stage cough that hid words like aggressive or angry was filed away for later. She didn't react, didn't give them the satisfaction, but she was always listening. Bryce was different now, bolder in a way that wasn't about noise but presence. He stood taller in the hallways, his eyes tracking her with a smirk that carried a jagged edge. To the school, he'd become the poster child of their twisted narrative, a white boy wronged by the angry black girl. It was a story they'd molded to fit their comfort, easier to swallow than the truth, simpler, cleaner. The first real strike came at lunch. Ayana sat alone, as she often did, at the far end of a cafeteria table near the humming vending machines. Halfway through her sandwich, a milk carton crashed onto her tray with a soggy thud, tipping over and soaking her carefully written notes. She froze for a moment, unblinking, then raised her eyes. Bryce stood a few feet away, arms spread in a mock apology, his gaze alight with feigned innocence. Two of his teammates sat nearby, their shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. One was already slipping his phone back into his hoodie pocket. Clumsy hands, Bryce said, shaking his head. Maybe you should work on your reflexes. Or was that part of your training too? Ayana's gaze held his, steady and unflinching. Her hand moved not toward him, but to the small towel in her bag, with deliberate, almost surgical precision. She blotted the spill, You must really need attention, she said, her voice calm, her eyes still on her notes. Is it that hard living in someone else's shadow? Bryce scoffed, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a hiss meant only for her. You can act all unbothered, but you're one viral video away from being finished. You think people are on your side, they're not. You're the angry girl who snapped, and we made sure everyone sees it that way. Ayana finished wiping her papers, folding the damp notes with care before tucking them into her bag. She stood slowly, her eyes now level with his. Keep talking, she said, her voice low and steady. Keep pushing. Keep pretending this ends the way you think it will. Is that a threat? Bryce's smirk widened. Yes, she replied, then brushed past him, leaving the words to hang in the air. The hallway after lunch was uglier. In an empty study room, someone had scrawled, "Keep your hands to yourself," animal across a whiteboard. It was half erased, but not before Ayana saw it. Not before half the school had. In the girls' bathroom, a voice whispered just loud enough to cut bet she learned that takedown at home. Probably gets hit by her dad when she mouths off. Ayana didn't respond. Not because the words didn't sting, but because she was honing her weapon for the perfect moment. Silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. At night, her bedroom became a war room. The wall above her desk was a mosaic of notes, timestamps, and details dates of incidents, names, locations. Her laptop, locked with a password and encrypted, held a growing archive of voice memos, photos, saved messages, and covert recordings. She'd bought a tiny wearable microphone online, one that clipped discreetly under her hoodie collar, capturing everything from classroom chatter to hallway taunts. Ayana didn't trust the school system or the adults who ran it to protect her, but she trusted her own preparation. You sure you don't want us to start knocking on doors? Her mother, Raquel, asked one evening, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed, her voice low but heavy with concern. Ayana didn't look up from her screen. Not yet. Raquel nodded, though her jaw remained tight. You're stronger than me. No, Ayana said, her voice quiet but firm, just colder. Raquel hesitated, then rested a gentle hand on her daughter. Concurrent exception, shoulder. Don't freeze all the way through, baby, just long enough to survive. Ayana didn't answer. She leaned into the silence and kept typing. Every name on her list would slip eventually. Someone would get careless. And when they did, Ayana wouldn't shout, she'd amplify. The shift came after fourth period on an afternoon that carried no warning. No storm clouds gathered. No announcements crackled over the intercom. No sudden shift in the lights signaled what was coming. It was just the slow, inevitable creep of a moment disguised as routine. Students filled the halls in clusters, some lingering by lockers, others spilling toward the courtyard where a spring breeze softened the day's heat. Ayana moved among them with her usual rhythm steps measured, backpack snug, earbuds in but the volume off. She felt it before it happened. The space behind her was too still, not empty of sound but stripped of chaos, like something choreographed. She turned a corner near the old theater wing, where the hallway narrowed and the dented lockers faded with age. Most students avoided this route, too far from the main classrooms, too easy to be overlooked. That's why she chose it. They were waiting. Bryce stepped out first, emerging from behind a stairwell door, his expression smug, as if he'd already won. Cody and Trent appeared next, one from a side corridor near the janitor's closet, the other strolling casually from the science wing. They said nothing at first, their silence heavy with intent. Ayana stopped, her eyes flicking between them, mapping distances, noting exits. Her pulse stayed steady, her breathing even. She'd been preparing for this since the first time they'd laughed at her pain like it was a performance. So, Bryce said, his arms spreading slightly, you're still strutting around like nothing happened. Ayana didn't answer. Cody stepped closer, grinning. Not so tough without your dad in the room, huh? Trent snorted, or your lawyers. Ayana tilted her head, her gaze sweeping their faces not with fear or exhaustion, but with the cool detachment of someone studying a puzzle. You really think this is smart, she asked, her voice calm, almost clinical. Cornering me again, with phones everywhere, with people watching. Nobody's watching, Bryce said, his voice low and confident. And nobody's going to care if you cry for help again. You've already burned through your sympathy points. Ayana took a single step forward, closing the gap between her and Bryce by an inch. You think I'm scared of you? She asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. You think because you swung and missed once, you'll get another shot. Bryce's smirk flickered, just for a moment. Ayana turned to Cody. How's that D- in chemistry? Still struggling with basic reactions. His grin vanished. Then to Trent. Still can't make varsity unless you're riding his coattails. Must be tiring, playing backup to someone who can't think without a crowd. Trent shifted, his jaw clenching. You've got a mouth, Bryce said, stepping closer. You've got a pattern, Ayana shot back. 3 boys, 1 girl, no cameras. You waited until I was alone. You always do, because you're cowards. And deep down, you know it. Bryce's composure cracked. You're not walking away this time. Ayana's chin lifted, her eyes sharp. Good. Then she ran not out of fear, but into her plan. Her steps were swift but controlled, her route already mapped in her mind. She darted down the back corridor, turned at the west stairwell, and pushed through the glass doors into the open-air commons, a wide courtyard framed by the cafeteria and classroom wings. At this hour, it hummed with life. Students sprawled at picnic tables, leaned against brick walls, phones out, earbuds in, lost in their own worlds. Ayana burst through the doors at a calculated pace fast enough to draw eyes, slow enough to keep her pursuers close. They followed, just as she'd known they would. Hey, Bryce shouted behind her. Heads turned. Ayana stopped in the center of the commons, near an old concrete planter shaped like a fountain that hadn't worked in years. Students paused, drawn by the urgency in Bryce's voice and the strange sight of Ayana, who rarely drew attention. Now standing still as 3 boys closed in, she turned slowly, deliberately. Now there were eyes. Now there were phones. I knew you'd come, she said, her voice clear and sharp, cutting through the courtyard's murmur. Don't flatter yourself, Bryce said, his breath heavy, his face flushed. You're about to get what you deserve. No, Ayana said, her gaze steady. You are. It was the flash of screens that caught her eye first, a shimmer of phones rising like a wave. Students shifted, their hands instinctively lifting devices, sensing something was about to unfold, though they didn't yet grasp what. Ayana stood in the center of the courtyard, her pulse steady, her gaze sharp. Bryce, on the other hand, was only now realizing the trap he'd walked into. He scanned the crowd, eyes darting, taking in the dozens of cameras now trained on him, capturing every move, every snarled word, every flicker of his temper. He was exposed, and he knew it, but he stepped forward anyway, his voice low and venomous. You really think anyone's going to buy your story this time? You think this changes a damn thing? Ayana didn't flinch. I'm not here to change your mind, she said, her tone calm but unyielding. I'm here so everyone else sees it. The air thickened. Trent edged to her left, his bulk looming as he tried to box her in. Cody drifted wide to her right, circling like a scavenger waiting for an opening. The crowd swelled, murmurs rippling through the students as they sensed the tension coiling tighter. Phones stayed up, recording, waiting. Bryce lunged, his hand shooting toward her, all raw fury and no precision. That was the moment the world tilted. Time didn't slow, it sharpened. Every sound, every shift of weight, every breath in the courtyard snapped into focus. Ayana's body moved before her mind needed to give the order. Years of training kicking in like muscle memory, nights in the garage with her mother, counting out punches until her knuckles ached. Mornings with her father, his voice steady as he demanded balance, breath, control. She didn't retreat. She stepped into the chaos, her shoulder twisting just enough to dodge Bryce's clumsy grab. Her foot snapped back in a single, fluid motion, her heel slamming into the side of his knee with surgical force. He staggered, his foot catching the lip of a planter, arms windmilling as he fought to stay upright. Before Bryce could hit the ground, Cody was already moving in from the right, thinking he could grab her, pin her, end this. He didn't see the elbow coming. Ayan pivoted, her torso twisting as she drove her arm back, the point of her elbow sinking into his ribs with a clean, brutal thud. Cody gasped, stumbling sideways, clutching his side as he braced himself against a bench where a group of freshmen sat, their phones trembling in their hands, eyes wide with shock. Trent was slower but more dangerous, taller than Bryce, heavier. He moved like he believed his size alone could steamroll her. He charged, fists clenched, chest puffed out like some caricature of a tough guy. Ayan dropped low, her legs sweeping out in a tight arc that hooked his ankle. At the same moment, her palm struck his sternum, redirecting all his momentum forward. His own weight betrayed him, and he crashed to the ground with a heavy grunt, knees and elbows scraping the concrete. By the time he rolled over, dazed, Ayan was already back on her feet, her breathing steady, her stance unshaken. The courtyard fell silent, the chatter and laughter of moments ago replaced by a stunned hush. What had started as a few curious onlookers had grown into a full audience, phones capturing every second. Bryce was up again, his pride more battered than his body, his face flushed with a mix of rage and humiliation. He roared, charging blindly, throwing punches that were all fury and no form. Ayan ducked the first, pivoted past the second. His third swing went wide, too high, and she caught his wrist, spinning with his momentum. Her foot planted, her weight shifted, and she sent him sprawling face first into the concrete with a thud that echoed across the commons. This time, he didn't get up. He lay there, groaning, his breath ragged, his lip bleeding. Then a sound broke the silence laughter. It started low, a disbelieving chuckle from somewhere in the crowd, then spread, growing louder as students shook their heads, covering their mouths in half-shocked amusement. Bryce Whitaker, the quarterback, the golden boy, the kid who walked like he owned the school, was sprawled on his back next to a cracked pencil case and a puddle from someone's spilled water bottle. Cody was still hunched over, clutching his ribs. Trent hadn't even tried to stand. And Ayan, she stood alone in the center of it all, her chest rising and falling evenly, her expression not triumphant, not angry, just resolved. She didn't pose or gloat. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the crowd, locking briefly on a girl in the second row, phone raised, lips parted in awe. Ayan gave her a single, silent nod. "Keep filming," she thought. A voice cut through the laughter, sharp and clear. "Three of you, and you still got smoked, damn." Another voice joined in, then another. "She folded you like laundry. Man, how you gonna get wrecked in front of everyone?" Bryce dragged himself up onto his elbows, his eyes wild, searching for something, anything to salvage this. But there was no undoing it. The crowd had seen it. The phones had recorded it, and Ayan wasn't backing down. Security pushed through moments later, too late to stop anything. One guard barked at the crowd to disperse, but the students were already breaking into clusters, whispering, laughing, their fingers still clutching phones as they retreated. "You in the black hoodie, stay put." Another guard shouted. Ayan didn't move. She glanced down at Bryce one last time, still crumpled at her feet, and said nothing. There was no need. He'd started it. She'd ended it. And the world had watched. By the time the bell rang for 7th period, the video was already spreading. It hit the school's message boards first, then Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok. One edit layered dramatic music over Bryce's failed punches. Another slowed the footage down, circling each of his swings with snarky captions like a sports highlight reel. None of the clips showed Ayan throwing the first blow. They didn't need to. She'd held her ground, defended herself, and now the world was watching. By Tuesday morning, the school was in chaos. The front office scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing directives for teachers to avoid discussing the incident until an investigation was complete. Students were warned not to share sensitive material during school hours. The morning announcements skipped their usual pep rally hype. Jumping straight to a mandatory assembly notice for Thursday, it didn't matter. The video had already escaped the school, reposted by an alum account with nearly 10,000 followers. By lunch, it had spread to other schools. Comments flooding in, some cheering Ayan, some confused, some angry that it had taken this for anyone to notice what she'd been dealing with for months. Ayan moved through the halls that day like a quiet storm. Some students stepped out of her way. Others offered awkward nods of respect. A few avoided her gaze entirely, unsure whether to laugh, applaud, or steer clear. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't need to. The silence spoke for her own. In the principal's office, the air felt heavy, the walls closing in. Principal Lin sat behind her desk, her smile tight and brittle. She didn't ask Aeon how she was, didn't offer water, didn't mention the bruise on Bryce's chin or Trent's limp or Cody's absence from school. She folded her hands and spoke in a tone that aimed for neutrality but landed closer to irritation. We're deeply concerned about what happened in the courtyard. While I know there are different perspectives, our priority is restoring calm and ensuring everyone's safety. Ayan met her gaze, unflinching. Is that why no one stepped in the first time? Or the second? Or when they cornered me by the dumpsters? Lynn's smile tightened, barely holding. We can't act on every rumor. Ayan. You didn't act on the video either, Ayan said, her voice low but cutting. Not until it went viral. Lynn leaned back, her expression shifting. A flicker of something annoyance, maybe, or discomfort. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Ayan replied. I'm just pointing out what gets ignored and what gets a statement. Lynn glanced at her folder, lips pressing into a thin line. There will be a disciplinary process for everyone involved. I encourage you to write a reflection on the incident. It could help the board during their review. Ayan gave a slow nod. You want a written account? We want clarity, Lynn said, her voice clipped, and cooperation. Ayan stood, her movements deliberate. You'll have both, on my terms. She walked out without another word. By the end of the day, the cafeteria was alive with whispers, rumors of suspensions, of parents calling the school, of Bryce's family demanding a meeting. But above it all, one phrase echoed in the halls, in the comments, in the group chats. 3-on-1, and the girl didn't flinch. Bryce strutted back to Eisenhower High, his new jacket crisp and a scab crusting over his left cheekbone. He moved with a rigid gait, flanked by 3 football teammates who formed a hulking barrier, as if their sheer bulk could restore the status quo. It didn't. Laughter trailed him down the halls, not loud, not cruel, but sharp enough to pierce the air. Whispers followed, and no amount of muscle could silence them. That evening, Ayana sat at her family's dinner table, her fork scraping against the plate in silence. Her parents, Marcus and Raquel, didn't push her to talk. They'd seen the video her mother once, her father 3 times. No one uttered words of pride, but they didn't need to. It was there in the quiet Marcus's single nod as she passed the salt. Raquel's careful hands sealing leftovers as if preserving something sacred. After dinner, Ayana retreated to her room, her laptop glowing in the dim light. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, not to pen some heartfelt essay, but to weave together a meticulous archive. She hadn't shared everything yet. The footage from the courtyard fight was just the spark. Now she was stoking a fire. She sifted through clips from the past month, hallway whispers caught on her phone's mic, insults hissed behind her in class, teachers brushing her off with weary, patronizing smiles. This wasn't about a single punch, it was about a pattern, a relentless drip of hostility she was now stitching into something irrefutable. She wasn't building this for the principal or the district, she was building it for the world. When she finished, she exported the file, backed it up on 3 drives, and tucked a copy into a private cloud folder under a pseudonym no one at school could trace. Before shutting her laptop, she sent herself a 1-line email. Release only if they try to silence me again. Then she stretched, flicked off the light, and braced for the next day's whispers, side eyes, and hollow compliments. They'd swung at her, but she was still standing. By Wednesday, Eisenhower High was no longer murmuring, it was unraveling. The video of the courtyard fight had spiraled into something uncontainable. Parents flooded the district's inbox with demands. Alumni lit up social media, calling for accountability. The administration tried to clamp down, but the narrative slipped through their fingers like sand. Subtle shifts rippled through the halls. Students stopped snickering and started filming not just Ayanna, but everything. The school had become a panopticon, every moment a potential exhibit. Bryce, Cody, and Trent still moved as a unit, but their bravado was fraying. Cody dodged eye contact. Trent hid under his hoodie. Bryce clung to his smirk, his swagger, but it was brittle. In history class, he snapped at a classmate who mentioned the video. At lunch, he shoved a freshman filming him into a locker. The facade was crumbling, and Ayanna watched it erode with the calm of someone who'd already seen the final frame. Students whispered her name now, not with scorn, but with caution, even reverence. A few tried to cozy up, tossing out comments about how epic her takedown was, or how they'd always known Bryce was a jerk. Ayanna didn't bite. She wasn't here for fleeting allies or cheap validation. She wanted resolution, not applause. That morning, the school called an emergency assembly, the email landing with carefully curated phrases about community values and safety. Ayanna read the subject line, smirked, and closed her laptop. They weren't just scrambling now, they were hemorrhaging. The gym buzzed as students filed in, the air thick with anticipation. Principal Lynn took the podium, her smile strained, her blazer a shade darker than usual. Her words were sharp, rehearsed. We thank you for your patience as we address recent events. Our priority is the safety and unity of our student body. Ayanna sat mid-bleachers, hoodie up, her expression unreadable. Lynn pressed on. What we've seen online is challenging, but social media is only part of a complex situation. We encourage students to use proper channels. We value your voices. It was a masterclass in deflection, a speech that mimicked care but reeked of containment. No mention of Ayanna, Bryce, or the fight, just vague platitudes about community and trust. When Lynn stepped back, the gym stayed silent. No one clapped. Students shuffled out, their hands twitching near their pockets, phones ready. In third period, Ayanna's inbox pinged. The district had sent a formal summons to meet with the regional equity coordinator. We are reviewing recent disciplinary decisions and value your perspective. She read it twice, flagged it, and leaned back. The net was tightening. That night, she sat in the living room, her laptop open, her parents across from her. Marcus, just back from the base, sat forward. Raquel set her phone face down on the coffee table. You sure about this? Raquel asked, her voice steady but searching. Once you release that file, there's no undoing it. Ayanna nodded. They're already spinning their story. I want the next move. Marcus tilted his head. What's the endgame exposure? Ayanna said, her voice like steel. Not just the fight, every ignored slight, every teacher who looked away, every time the office said it wasn't enough. Raquel raised an eyebrow. And then Ayanna didn't flinch. Accountability. Marcus gave a small, approving nod. Send it to the district, but hold off on going public. Ayanna said. They get one chance to fix it quietly. If they don't, I will. Raquel studied her daughter, then slid a small, encrypted flash drive across the table. Just in case. Ayanna pocketed it without a word. Thursday dawned with a different kind of tension. A news van idled outside the school's entrance. A local journalist, tenacious, known for digging into community scandals, strode into the main office. Camera bag slung over her shoulder. Notebook in hand. Ayanna walked the halls, her head high. Bryce loitered by the vending machines. His posture stiff, his eyes darting toward her with something new, not defiance, not even anger, but doubt. By lunch, a new question hummed through the student body. Did you see the leak? At 8:02 a.m., an email had landed in inboxes across the school students, teachers, administrators, district officials. No subject, no greeting, just a hyperlink and 4 words in bold black. You didn't protect her. By 8:07, it had been forwarded over 100 times. By 8:15, it was circulating in private student chats and parent Facebook groups. By 8:21, the journalist who'd visited the school tweeted the link with 1 word: unbelievable. Ayana sat in first period, hoodie low, headphones in, but silent, her eyes fixed on her notebook. She didn't need to watch the video again. She'd lived every second of it. It didn't open with fists or shouting. It began with a still image her locker, dripping with syrup, then audio Bryce's voice sneering, "Go back to Africa," followed by Cody's cackle. Next came the water fountain incident, harassment outside the cafeteria, a slur scrawled on a whiteboard. A spreadsheet faded in, time-stamped and meticulous, cataloging over 20 incidents across 3 months, each backed by audio, screenshots, or brief clips. The pattern was stark, deliberate, and ignored. Then the fight unedited. Wide angle, 3 against 1, no narration, no music, no plea, just the raw, unvarnished truth. The final minute showed an email from the school, dismissing her complaint as insufficient evidence. Ayana closed her notebook. The school could bury a single fight. They couldn't bury a timeline. The walls of Eisenhower High weren't just buckling, now they were collapsing, and she was still standing. The air at Eisenhower High was thick with tension, a storm of whispers and glances that followed Ayana like a shadow. It all began when she filed her formal complaint, a bold move that set off a chain reaction no one could ignore. The school's response was swift and cold, a suspension letter, delivered with the kind of bureaucratic indifference that stings worse than outright hostility. But the real turning point came at the final assembly, when Principal Lynn stood before the student body, her voice measured but hollow. "Social media is only one part of a complex situation," she said, leaving the words to hang in the air, sharp and unresolved, like a guillotine poised to fall. No apologies, no calls to action, just a heavy, uncomfortable truth that left everyone squirming. By second period, Eisenhower High wasn't a school anymore. It was a battlefield. Classes dragged on, but the usual hum of learning was gone. Students sat frozen, their eyes glued to their phones, scrolling through the video that had shattered the facade of normalcy. Teachers stood at the front of their classrooms, some fumbling through lesson plans, others pretending they hadn't seen the footage that was now everywhere. But the ones who mattered, the students who had been told to let it go, the teachers who had overheard slurs and kept walking, the administrators who had weighed Ayana's quiet dignity against Bryce's football jersey, they had seen it, they had heard it, and they were terrified. In third period, Ayana was summoned, but not to the principal's office. This time, it was the district superintendent's office, a place most students never saw. A tall man in a sharp navy suit waited by the door, clutching a clipboard, his expression calm but unfamiliar. "We'd like to speak with you," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Privately." Ayana nodded, her face unreadable, and followed him to a room she'd never been in before, a sterile boardroom with a long table and wide windows. Her parents were already there, sitting tall, their faces carved from stone. They hadn't spoken publicly in the weeks since the video surfaced. They didn't need to. Ayana's silence had roared louder than any press conference could. The superintendent didn't mince words. "What you've shown us is deeply disturbing," he said, his voice steady but weighted with gravity. "We're launching a full investigation, effective immediately." Ayana didn't respond. "Principal Lynn has been placed on administrative leave pending review," he continued. "Bryce Whitaker, Cody Randall, and Trent Ellis are suspended indefinitely. Formal expulsion hearings are being scheduled." Still, she said nothing, her eyes fixed on some distant point. "We'll issue a public apology to you and your family, and the school board wants to meet with you directly." At that, Ayana tilted her head, just slightly. Why, she asked. her voice quiet but piercing. Because we failed, the superintendent admitted, no hesitation in his words. And they know it. Her mother, Raquel, glanced at her, a flicker of pride in her eyes. Her father, Marcus, gave a single nod, as if he'd always known his daughter was capable of this kind of strength. Ayana looked down at her hands, folded neatly on the table. I don't want a statement, she said finally, her voice clear. I want change. The superintendent nodded, not with the empty promises of a politician, but with the weight of someone who understood. You'll have it, he said. Policy, procedure, oversight. Ayana stood, her movements deliberate. I have nothing else to say, she said, and walked out. Word spread like wildfire. By noon, Principal Lynn had been escorted off campus, her departure quiet but impossible to ignore. By early afternoon, the story broke on local news, then escalated to national outlets. By dinner time, the headline was stark and unforgiving. Black students' hidden recordings exposed pattern of abuse and school negligence. By Friday, Bryce's name had been erased from the team roster. His father's social media accounts vanished, and Trent's mother issued a vague statement about boys needing my guidance. Cody tried to claim he was just a bystander, but the audio told a different story. His voice, clear and complicit, was unmistakable. The school issued an official statement 2 days later, but it was too late. The internet had already rendered its verdict. On Monday morning, Ayana returned to Eisenhower High, her black hoodie a quiet declaration of defiance. Her steps were steady, her gaze unwavering. Some students clapped as she entered first period, a spontaneous show of respect. She didn't acknowledge it. Others approached her, offering support or asking for interviews, but she brushed them off with a gentle wave. This wasn't about fame, it was about being seen, about never being dismissed again. She sat at her desk, pulled out her notes, and opened her pen. She didn't smile, not yet. The fight wasn't over, but it was hers now. Weeks later, as spring break loomed, Ayana walked the halls of Eisenhower High one last time. The building hadn't changed, same chipped lockers, same faded prom posters, same stubborn water fountain that never quite worked right. But the atmosphere had. The silence that once hunted her through these corridors had lost its edge. The stares that used to carry smirks and suspicion were now quiet, cautious, even respectful. She didn't need their admiration. She wasn't here for applause. She was here to finish what she'd started. The ripples from the video hadn't stopped. The school board issued a formal statement, admitting to systemic failures and pledging to address student safety concerns. Principal Lynn resigned before the investigation could conclude. Her exit, as quiet as her leadership, had been inadequate. Bryce's family pulled him from the district, and Cody and Trent soon followed, their lockers emptied under the watchful eyes of faculty. No apologies came from them, but Ayana hadn't asked for remorse. She demanded truth, and truth, once unleashed, doesn't retreat. The school introduced new policies. All harassment complaints would now be reviewed by an independent equity liaison within 72 hours. Audio evidence was officially recognized as valid. Students were trained on their rights, and faculty underwent mandatory racial bias workshops. Not the usual half-hearted sessions led by district insiders, but raw, real training by outsiders with lived experience and no tolerance for empty gestures. Ayana didn't attend those workshops. She'd already lived the lessons they were trying to teach. Change wasn't complete. Some students still avoided her, their guilt or discomfort keeping them at a distance. Some teachers couldn't meet her eyes, their silence a confession of their own failures. The system itself resisted, as systems always do, bending only when forced. But there were signs of progress. Girls she'd never spoken to stopped her in the halls to say thank you, their gratitude needing no explanation. Boys who once laughed with Bryce now looked away when she passed, their bravado stripped bare. A few teachers, only a handful, but enough started asking harder questions in class, listening more closely, watching the quiet corners where cruelty used to fester unnoticed. One afternoon, Ayana stepped into the courtyard where it had all come to a head, where Bryce had charged at her, his rage raw and unfiltered. The broken water fountain at the center had been replaced, its new steel surface gleaming in the sunlight. It wasn't until her second pass that she noticed the small black plaque at its base. Let silence be a shield only for those with peace, not protection for cruelty. No name, no attribution, just a message, etched in quiet defiance. She sat on the edge of a planter, pulling a notebook from her bag. It wasn't for school, it was for her. Not to study, but to write. She didn't write about the pain or the fight itself. She wrote about the strategy, the patience, the strength it took to wait for the right moment to act. It wasn't a diary, it was a roadmap, a guide for someone else, someone younger, someone watching, because someone always was. Her father's footsteps broke her reverie. Marcus approached, hands in his pockets, his presence steady as always. They called again. He said, his voice low, "The school board wants to know if you'll speak at their meeting next month." Ayanna looked up from her notebook. "About what?" He shrugged. "Whatever you want. They're not trying to script you this time. They just want you to speak." She paused, considering. "I'll think about it," she said. He nodded. "You don't have to say anything. What you've already done is louder than most people manage in a lifetime." She closed her notebook and stood, falling into step beside him as they walked toward the parking lot. The afternoon breeze tugged at her sleeves, and students passed by, some smiling, some just watching, none bold enough to interrupt. They didn't need to. Ayanna had already said everything that mattered. As she slid into the car and leaned back against the seat, she didn't feel exhausted or triumphant. She felt ready. There would be other battles, other halls, other Bryces. But she'd carry every lesson with her, every moment of stillness, every breath between insult and action, every second of courage that turns silence into a weapon. The moment before a strike carries its own kind of power, not in the force of the blow, but in the weight of everything it holds. For Ayanna, that weight had shifted. She'd sworn to herself she'd never again sit idly, waiting for the world to decide her place. Eisenhower High hadn't changed much on the surface. The same corkboard outside the counselor's office sagged with peeling notices, its edges curling like old parchment. A rickety metal rack still cradled a jumble of faded college brochures, their corners dog-eared from years of neglect. The third locker from the left in the science wing still groaned with that familiar creak when someone leaned against it. The bones of the school were the same, but its pulse felt different now. Not louder or softer, just raw, unguarded, like the walls had finally stopped whispering secrets and started speaking truth. Ayanna moved through the hallways with a quiet confidence, her steps unhurried, her shoulders free of the ghost that used to cling to them. She didn't glance back to check for shadows or brace for the stinging of words hurled from corners, the fear of what might be said behind her back, the dread of where the next blow might land. It was gone, like dust swept from a long-forgotten shelf. She carried herself with a steadiness that didn't need to announce itself. It was just past noon when she approached the water fountain near the science wing, the same one where Bryce had once pressed his palm over the spout, laughing as he turned her need for a drink into a public spectacle. Back then, his cruelty had worn the mask of charm, as if history could be rewritten with a smirk. Now the fountain gleamed with new stainless steel pipes, its polished edges catching the light. The sensor worked flawlessly. No button needed, no permission required. Ayanna slowed, her gaze lingering on it for a moment. Then she leaned forward and drank. The water was cold, clear, and hers. No one blocked her path. No one stared. She straightened, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and turned away. 3 girls stood near the lockers, their conversation halting as she approached. One, short with thick glasses and a dog-eared poetry book tucked under her arm, offered a tentative smile. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but steady. Ayanna tilted her head, waiting. "We saw the video," the girl went on, her words careful but earnest. "Not just the fight, everything you posted after, the receipts, all of it." The tallest of the 3, her braids pulled tight and neat against her scalp. Step forward. We used to think we had to handle stuff alone, like speaking up would just make it worse. It usually did, she said, her voice carrying the weight of experience. The third girl, quieter, added, but not after you. Ayana stayed silent, her expression unreadable but open. Now they know we're watching each other. The tall girl continued, we're not staying quiet anymore. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ayana gave a small nod, a gesture that felt like a bridge. What's your name, she asked. Jada. Denise. Saria. They answered, their voices soft but clear. Not introductions, but offerings. Ayana's lips curved slightly. Y'all sit anywhere in the cafeteria. The girls exchanged quick glances. Used to stay by the back wall. Jada said, people would say stuff. Ayana's nod was firm. Not anymore. Save me a seat. Their smiles bloomed, not the tight, nervous kind, but wide and real, like they'd been waiting for permission to breathe. Ayana walked with them toward the courtyard as the lunch bell rang, the crowd spilling out into the sunlight. People noticed her now, not with whispers or sideways glances, but with casual waves, like she was part of the rhythm of the day. A boy pointed her way, his words lost in the chatter, but his tone carried respect, not mockery. A freshman from her English class, her backpack slung low, asked if she could join them. Ayana gave a subtle nod, and the girl fell into step. Ayana didn't lead the group, she just didn't walk alone anymore. At their table in the cafeteria, someone had left a folded napkin with a quote scrawled in black ink. You spoke without shouting, and we still heard you. No signature, no fuss. Ayana slipped it into the inner flap of her notebook without a word. Lunch unfolded in easy waves, talk of music, prom plans, group projects, and the science teacher who still butchered photosynthesis like it was a French dessert. Ayana didn't steer the conversation or fill the silences. She listened, laughed softly when it felt right, and spoke when it mattered. Her silence wasn't a shield anymore. It had done its work and earned its rest. After lunch, she stopped by the library. Ms. Park, the librarian who'd once given her detention for having a tone, looked up from her desk and offered a slight nod. No words, no apologies, just a gesture that carried the weight of one. Ayana didn't expect more. She browsed the shelves and picked out a novel, not for research or proof, but for the simple joy of reading. For the first time in months, she sank into the pages without scanning the room for threats. When the final bell buzzed, she walked the halls again, her pace slow and unhurried. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a message from the district. They'd formed a new student equity panel and wanted her to speak, this time on her own terms. She didn't reply right away. Stepping outside, she felt the light breeze curl through the courtyard, the fountain glinting behind her. The school, for all its imperfections, was no longer just a place where she survived. It knew her name now, not because she'd bled to prove herself, but because she'd refused to let it erase her. At the edge of the parking lot, her mother's SUV pulled up, smooth and steady. The window rolled down, and Raquel, sunglasses pushing back her hair, leaned out slightly. Good day, she asked, her voice warm but not pressing. Ayana opened the door, slid into the passenger seat, and set her backpack between her feet. Yeah, she said simply. It was. Raquel didn't ask for more. She didn't need to. As they drove away, Ayana glanced back at the school just once, not to check for followers or to relive the past, but to anchor herself in the truth she'd changed this place, and it would never be the same for her or anyone else.